personnel.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Seth Wolf. I'm a pediatric emergency medicine physician at Yale and at Greenwich Hospital as well. And today we're going to talk about pediatric safety and injury prevention. Should anyone have any questions, please, you can log in to the Q&A and fill in the questions there. If I don't respond, I'll respond certainly at the end of the presentation. I have no disclosures or conflicts of interest for this talk. So I just wanted to go through some objectives of what we're going to, kind of talk about. We're going to first start with understanding the epidemiology and trends in pediatric injuries. We're going to discuss what kinds of injuries are most common in different age groups. We're going to discuss the history of pediatric injury prevention. We're going to discuss specific pediatric injuries and areas of pediatric injury prevention. We're going to try to identify some methods to improve pediatric safety and understand the current laws in place, specifically in Connecticut, and the ongoing legislative and public health efforts to improve pediatric safety and prevent injuries. And for those that I think joined a couple minutes late, just if you have any questions or anything, please feel free to use the Q&A to ask questions. And if I don't get to them during the presentation, I will definitely answer them at the end. Okay, so moving on. I think it's fitting that this presentation comes in April, which is coincidentally National Distracted Driving Awareness Month. And I'll talk more about this later, but realize that distracted driving is a deadly epidemic. And the goal of this month is really to increase awareness, kind of regroup and take responsibility for the decisions we make. So I'll kind of jump right in here and, we'll start with kind of looking at kind of the injuries in kids. And we're going to start just with a short video here of this is just the most common causes of death in the US for all ages, and focusing on unintentional injuries. So as you saw, unintentional injuries are the third most common cause of death in general for all ages, but that's not the full story. Looking at deaths in a specific age group, this is ages 1 to 44 years old, so the younger population. Unintentional injuries are the number one cause of death. And so you look at the graph here, that big blue bar on top shows that there's over, almost 63,000 unintentional deaths, 63,000 deaths from unintentional injuries per year in the United States. And the unintentional injuries have been the number one cause for the past, over 20 years. If you look at the bottom graph there, that blue line on top, that just means that unintentional injuries cause the most deaths in the country in this age group, the 1 to 44. And so moving on specifically to pediatrics, this is looking at the leading causes of death by age, and this is in years. So I think, looking at it in ages kind of 1 to, your older teens and adolescents, unintentional injuries are by far the most common. And less than 1 unintentional injuries are also common, but they have other things that they more commonly die from. And so unintentional injuries, is where we'll focus today and kind of talk about safety and injury prevention. And so looking at unintentional injuries specifically, here are the types of injuries sustained leading to death in these age groups. And with these in mind, we'll focus on some of these during this talk. And so infants, those like less than 1, are more likely to suffer fatal injuries from suffocation, motor vehicle collisions, burns, and falls. Toddlers and preschool children are more likely to die from, motor vehicle accidents. Is on there. Unintentional drowning is number 1. Fires, burns, suffocations, things like that. School-age children, those are the ages like 5 to 9. Again, unintentional motor vehicle accidents are number 1. Drowning, fires and burns and suffocation are also on there. And then getting older, you can see on the motor vehicle collisions are continuing to be very common. And then as you get older, the suicide and homicide goes up as well. And then looking at rates of death by unintentional injury by state. So this is a map of the United States, obviously, and then looking at specifically in the Northeast and Connecticut, in the tri-state area in general. The lighter yellow boxes have lower rates per 100,000 rates of death, whereas the darker orange have higher rates. So the Northeast is very low. Connecticut specifically is very low as well. And this is for ages 1 to 21, not all ages, just the pediatric age range. And so just to summarize, accidental injuries are the leading cause of death and disability for children over 1 year, greater than or equal to 1 year of age, as well as adolescents and young adults. This is, and what number is it? It's about 1,700,000 deaths per year in ages 0 to 24 in 2017. And in the United States, 1 child dies every hour from an injury, and it's estimated that on average, every 4 seconds, a child is treated in an emergency department for an injury. And this equates to 6 million children and young adults less than 19 years old. And so there is a significant medical impact. There's also a significant financial impact from these unintentional injuries. So this is data from the CDC in, I think, from 2005. And so this is a bit of a busy slide, but I just want to bring your attention to 2 things. And this is broken down by mechanism of injury. And so looking at the kind of total cost, so the total medical cost, this is the lifetime medical costs accrued from injuries like treatment and rehabilitation, is almost $78 million. And this is for patients less than 19 years old. And then looking at the total work loss cost. So this is like lost wages from parents, lost, benefits, and self-provided household services. And that estimates to be at $12 billion. So a large financial burden from these injuries. And so what are the recent trends? So we've identified the types and mechanisms of injuries in pediatric patients and the significant medical and financial impact. But let's discuss injury prevention and control. There is some good news. The unintentional injury death rate in children 0 to 19 years of age has been declining. So it's down about 29% from over the past, from 2000 2009. And in 2016, the rate was about 10.1 per 100,000. So it's continuing to go down. And why is that? So there's 2 major events that have contributed significantly to this reduction in mortality and morbidity from injuries. In 1986, Congress passed what's called the Injury Prevention Act. And then in 1992, the government started funding something called the National Center for Injury Prevention and Control. And this works with other federal agencies and funds research for injury prevention. And this increased research has led to new knowledge and strategies for the prevention and control of childhood injuries. And injury prevention has become recognized as a field of science, not just for kids, but for all ages. And what they use, and I'm not going to go into full detail with this, it's a bit out of the scope, but what they've developed is something called this Haddon injury control model. And it's a well-accepted model of injury prevention. And it tries to control different factors to prevent injury. And how it does that is it looks at kind of 2 dimensions to help control these factors. One is called the event dimension. And that's kind of looking at the timing of the injury. And so it's divided into 3 phases. Before the injury or event, which is called the primary prevention. And this would be an example would be like, bicycle or driver training. So something that you do before the injury happens. There's the phase of at the time of the injury or event, which is called secondary prevention, which is like wearing a bicycle helmet. And that'll help prevent a head injury. And then there's dimensions after the injury or event called the tertiary prevention, and that's getting like better access to first aid or better medical care. And then along with those, there's epidemiologic dimensions, and this kind of helps control certain factors, such as human factors, which is looking at adult supervision and training to try to prevent pediatric injuries. Looking at the vehicular agent, so for instance, vehicle redesigns, better airbags, better seat belts, reducing speed limits, things like that. Your physical environment. This would be an example for that would be, dedicated walking and bicycle lanes to help prevent, collisions. And then your socio-cultural and political environment can be adjusted. This is your legal and regulatory changes in laws. And so here's some examples of why there's been a reduction in mortality and morbidity. So increased use of seatbelts and child safety seats, reduction in drunk driving, increased use of child-resistant packaging, better safety awareness in general, and improved medical care. All right. So with that in our mind now, so we know we've kind of established that pediatric injuries are common and can cause significant injury and even death, unfortunately, sometimes. But I want to talk more now onto specific injury prevention strategies, and we'll start, I think, with one of the biggest ones in my mind is child passenger safety. And as I discussed previously, motor vehicle collisions rank #1 or are very high as a cause of unintentional injuries in pediatrics. And so with the development of car seats and booster seats, so car seats, reduce the risk of death in motor vehicle collisions by about 71% for infants and 54% for toddlers 1 to 4 years old. And going on as they get older to booster seats, this use reduces the risk of serious injury by about 45% compared to seatbelt use alone for children in that 4 to 8 age range. And then it's been found that when parents and caregivers know their state law, they're more likely to use a car seat for their child. And here's a couple of pictures of some very adorable children smiling in their car seats. And I don't know if I'll speak for myself, but I'm sure there's many others listening that say that this is not typically what it looks like in my car. It's usually much dirtier, but also there's a lot of yelling and screaming, and the kids don't look that happy usually. So I have a little bit of a quiz here. Not that you have to, yell out an answer, but just looking at kind of car seat recommendations. And this comes from the American Academy of Pediatrics and the CDC. This is not necessarily law in states, and I'll go over what entails law in Connecticut. But it's recommended that children should ride in a rear-facing car safety seat. And the answer is as long as possible, up to the limits of their car safety seat. So you definitely want to you want your child to ride in a rear-facing car safety seat until they're age 2 and at least 30 pounds. But recent developments in car seat safety and car seat design they've increased their kind of weight limits for these seats to make sure that every child gets to at least 2 to be riding rear-facing. And looking at, as they get older, once children have been turned around to a forward-facing car seat, they should remain in this 5-point forward-facing car seat. And again, it's as long as possible, up to that seat's weight and length limits. And I'm going to talk more about kind of weight and length limits in a few slides. And most forward-facing car seats can accommodate children up to 60 pounds or more. And so after outgrowing the forward-facing car seat, a child should use a seatbelt positioning booster seat until the answer is until the seatbelt fits properly. And when does a seatbelt fit properly? When the lap belt lays across their upper thighs and not the stomach, and on the shoulder, and the shoulder belt lies across their chest and not their neck. Okay, and so these are some other points about child passenger safety. And so once a child exceeds the booster limits and are large enough to use the seatbelt, the vehicle seatbelt alone, they should always use a lap and shoulder belt. And all children younger than 13 years old should be restrained in rear seats of vehicles for optimal protection. So they should never sit in the front seat until at least after they're 13. All right, so we talked about now those were kind of recommendations from the AAP and so, but what does it say about so, and like I said, there's different laws and each state has different laws, and so it varies. And so what are the laws in Connecticut? So for infants, they must remain in a rear-facing car seat until they are a minimum of 2 years and 30 pounds. That's consistent with the AAP. Toddlers should be in a forward-facing car seat with a 5-point harness until they're at least 5 years old and 40 pounds. Children should ride in a booster seat until they reach 8 years old and 60 pounds, and they must use a lap and shoulder belt. And then this just is a general, but children, tweens, and teens should be in a seatbelt whenever they ride in a vehicle. And the further recommendation is children should ride in the backseat until they're 13 years old. So a lot of kind of correlation with the AAP. And so what happens if you violate these laws? You pay a fine and attend a 2-hour educational car seat class at the DMV. I think the car seat class at the DMV is pain enough to follow the law, just to be at the DMV. And so I'll be the first to say that if you're struggling with your child's safety seat, you're not alone. With the daily demands of parenthood, it may feel impossible to keep up with the new car seat technologies, recalls, and the ever-changing child passenger safety laws. Car seat safety can get complicated fast, and I understand that, but there are resources out there. there's something called child passenger safety technicians, and these are members of the community who are certified to install car seats and educate caregivers on child passenger safety. They have taken this certification course and are certified through Safe Kids Worldwide. And there are approximately 75 fitting stations in Connecticut. So there are places where you can go and get your car seats installed, checked, and fitted by these certified technicians. I've included these two websites, CT Safe Kids and the website for the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. All have good resources, and you can search for the closest fitting station to you. A lot of fire departments are fitting stations, so that's a good place to start at least. And then I mentioned, about the overwhelming commercialization of car seats, and there's so many out there, and there's convertible seats, all-in-one combination. It's a bit overwhelming, but this website is very useful. It's healthychildren.org, associated with the AAP. They have this website is an extensive and comprehensive list of car seats with weight and height and weight limits. Excuse me. They have information on rear-facing only car seats, convertible seats, all-in-one seats, and combination seats. Those are forward-facing and booster seats, and belt positioning booster only seats. So they have a link, and you can click on it. This is kind of what it looks like. This is just an example of the first part of the convertible seats, but it lists, the weight limits, the height limits, can it recline, the price. So it has a lot of information, and I feel like it's a good summary and consolidation of information. All right, moving on to, again, sticking on kind of motor vehicle safety, but more specifically teen driving safety. Thankfully, my children are not driving yet, and I'm dreading when the time comes. But motor vehicle collisions are the most common cause of mortality and injury for adolescents and young adults in developed countries. And this is secondary to the immaturity, inexperience, and risky behavior that puts newly licensed teen drivers at risk. The highest rate of NPCs in the US is in that 15 to 19-year-old age range. And if they're novice adolescent drivers with less than 18 months of experience, they have a 4 times overall risk of crash or near crash events. And more than half of the 8 to 17-year-old children who die in car crashes are killed as passengers of drivers younger than 20 years of age. So it's not just the drivers, it's the passengers who suffer as well. But there is good news. The number of teens killed in motor vehicle collisions has decreased by around 50% over the last decade. And this reflects kind of vehicle safety advances, improvements in seatbelt use, improved impaired driving enforcement, and the impact of graduated driver's licensing laws. So GDL laws is what we call them. And I'll talk more about those in detail in a couple slides. But the trend is going down, as you can see here. This is the number of deaths per year of teens in the US, both drivers and other passengers. And it's been going down, although you can see as we get to 2014 and 2015, kind of stabilizes out, and it's been kind of an uptick as well. But it's been kind of on the trend down for the most part. So what are GDL laws? These are laws that place restrictions on novice drivers under the age of 18. They promote skills development by behind-the-wheel supervised experience. It reduces exposure to risky driving situations, and all 50 states and the District of Columbia have implemented these type of programs. However, this is an asterisk. They all have GDL laws, but all the laws differ. There's not one specific, national licensing standard in the U.S. And so I'll talk about Connecticut's laws in a little bit. So GDL laws are most effective. Our most effective GDL laws eliminate multiple risk factors for motor vehicle collisions by teen drivers by having a minimum permit age of 16, a minimum intermediate licensing age of 17, and a night driving restriction, so no driving after 8, and a ban on any teen passengers during the intermediate stage. And then these, they're called graduated driver's license, and also because they gradually eliminate restrictions depending on the length of time one has held his or her license or learner's permit. So it's been shown that kind of states with the most stringent GDL laws have had reductions of about 38% for fatal MVCs and 40% for non-fatal MVCs by teen drivers. And a study by the IIHS estimated that if all 50 states enacted the most stringent GDL laws, 500 more lives a year would be saved by MVCs by teen drivers. And so where does the Connecticut law stand? Connecticut does have a pretty strict GDL law. So for your learner's permit, You must be at least 16 years old and pass a 25-question test. Rules for learner's permit holders: they may only drive when supervised, and they cannot have any passengers except for a licensed driving instructor or a parent. Kids can obtain their driver's license. It requires they have their learner's permit for at least 120 days if they've taken driving school, or 180 days for home taught drivers. Completion: they must complete a 30-hour classroom instruction course and a 40 hours on the road training with a 2-hour course for the parent, and they pass a road skills test at the DMV. And then as far as rules on the road, there's no driving between 11 and 5. There are exceptions, to this if it's for school, their job, religious, medical necessity, or a safe ride program. There's absolutely no use of any mobile device or hands-free cell phone use. There's no texting. There's no passengers in the first 6 months of licensure, and no passengers in the second 6 months except for members of the driver's immediate family. And all passengers must wear seatbelts regardless of age. And so there are, for violations of these passenger curfew, any DUI, speeding over 20 miles per hour over the limit, racing, or reckless driving leads to a 48-hour immediate suspension of the license. And the police can take the license on the spot, and the car can be towed on the spot. So transitioning from there to distracted driving, which is another big problem, as like I mentioned before, in 2019, distracted driving killed over 3,000 people, and this is a 10% increase from 2018. And looking at the age range, drivers 16 to 24 use electronic handheld devices at a higher rate than older drivers, so are more at risk. And parents are the key to safe teen drivers. The CDC does have a good resource for parents. It's a good website for parents to help with guidance on teen driving safety. It's good to know it has, laws for each state, but it's good to know the laws for your state, and create it has recommendations to create kind of a parent-teen driving agreement and implement rules to help your teens stay safe on the road. Obviously, parents and caregivers, guardians have, experience driving, and so it's good to share your knowledge about safe driving. And yeah, so it's a good resource. All right, moving. I think, this is a good segue into two important summertime emergencies that I'd like to talk about, as summer is kind of quickly approaching, and we'll hopefully be able to get out and experience the world, without a lot of restrictions. But first we'll talk about vehicular hyperthermia, or child hot car deaths. These child hot car deaths and injuries are largely misunderstood by the general public. It can be very difficult for individuals to accept this important information about hot car dangers, because people, including myself, don't think these messages really apply to them, and it's never going to happen to them. No one thinks it's going to happen to him or her, but I was personally involved in one of these deaths as a treating physician. This is a 3-year-old who presented to the emergency department, and I'll never forget this case and the devastation it brought to not only obviously to the family, but to myself and the staff that was working that day. A very devastating case. But about, there's been 810 children have died from heat stroke since 1994. This is about 39 per year, 1 every 9 days. 88% of children who have died in a hot car are less than or equal to 3 years old. The majority of these are children that are less than 2. And this is because they're facing the rear of the car when they're car seats, and they look the same to the driver if there's a child there or not. I know there's a lot of parents and have those mirrors that they can see, which is very helpful. There's 69% of children who get into vehicles on their own are male. So not only is it kids being left in the car, it's kids getting into the car themselves. And we'll talk about that a little more in detail in a few slides. So realize that the majority of child hot car deaths are not, intentional. The child was unknowingly left in the vehicle. And it was a loving, responsible parent that unknowingly left the child in the vehicle. So 55% occur in this fashion. And then about a quarter, 26% of the children gain access to the vehicle on their own, and much less, the child is unknowingly left in the vehicle. So what happens? Why does it heat up so quickly in the car? It's something called the greenhouse effect, and inside a vehicle heats up very quickly. 80% of the increase in the inside temperature occurs in the first 10 to 30 minutes. So if you have a temperature outside that's 86 degrees, it can go up to into the 130s, into the 150s very quickly. Cracking the windows does not help. It doesn't help slow the heating process or decrease the maximum temperature. And the greatest risk is during the summer months, but it can occur year round. Children have died from heat stroke in cars when the outside temperature is 60 degrees. And in cold months, when the temperature is just above freezing, 1 degree Celsius, which is just above 32 degrees, heat stroke temperatures can be reached in several hours. So if it's direct sunlight, you still have that risk. And children are at the greatest risk. Why? Because they overheat 3 to 5 times faster than adults. They don't have those good ways to like sweating and to ways to dissipate that heat from the body. There are parental factors, changing the daily routine, lack of sleep, especially with a newborn or infant, stress, fatigue, distractions. It can happen. And children often fall asleep in car seats. They're quiet little passengers, so you can easily, it can be easy to forget about. So here's some safety tips and simple solutions to keep your child safe. One is place your child's diaper bag or an item in the front passenger seat as a visual cue, so that you look there and you're like, oh, yep, you got to get this and get my kid out of the car. Place a personal item of yours that you need for your day in the back, such as your phone, handbag, laptop, employee badge, and so that makes you open the back door every time you park. And putting your phone there, is a good idea, because then you won't be on your phone when you drive. So 2 birds, 1 stone. And then ask your daycare or childcare to call you right away if your child has not arrived as scheduled. So if you drive straight to work and forget that you put your kid in the car, they'll call and say your child hasn't arrived. Like that's a good thing to have. And clearly announce and confirm who is getting each child out of the car if you have more than 1 caregiver. And this is to help avoid miscommunication. Always keep vehicles locked when not in use so that kids can't get in them. Never leave your keys within the reach of your child. Teach children to honk the horn or turn on the lights if they become stuck in a car, if they're old enough. And use childproofing knob covers and door alarms to prevent children from exiting the home. This all kind of prevents them from accidentally getting into the car. And there's also kind of what to do if you see a child alone in a car. Call 911 immediately. If the child seems hot or sick, get them out of the vehicle as quickly as possible. And then once you get them out, if they seem, very sick, very hot, you spray them or apply cold water onto the child. Don't avoid dunking them into ice water. But you always want to, look before you lock. And so there is some available technology to prevent hot car deaths. And I'm going to talk more about kind of the Connecticut law and federal laws that are, trying to be passed. But here, this slide is kind of showing some available technology to prevent hot car deaths. Some car manufacturers have features that you can purchase when buying a car. And there are other systems that you can purchase aftermarket that can detect the presence of like a pet or child. So pets also fall into this category. The 3 on the left, this VIAR next gen automotive sensor, Vox Smart has this Solo system, and Asahi Kasei has this another system. These are all they can detect active occupants via various means. Sometimes it's carbon dioxide levels, sometimes it's breathing, sometimes it's just movement in the car, and this can alert the parent or caregiver via smartphone or start to automatically open the windows as well. And then the 2 on the right are examples of other devices for purchase. This Clever Ellie reminds drivers to check the back seat before exiting the vehicle. It also serves as a dual USB charger. The co-pilot attaches to an infant car seat strap and sends the signal to an alarm keychain fob that attaches to car keys, so that if you leave your car seat buckled and you don't unbuckle it, after you leave the car, an alarm on the key fob sounds. So these are all ways to kind of help notify that someone else is in the car. And what does Connecticut law say? This is a very busy slide, but really any parent, guardian, or caregiver who knowingly leaves a child less than 12 years old unsupervised in a place of public accommodation or a motor vehicle for a period of time that presents substantial risk to the child's health or safety is illegal. So generally doing that is a misdemeanor. If you do it outside of a place of what's called Chapter 45 for the sale of alcoholic liquor for consumption, like a bar or liquor store, it can be a felony. And if you do it, overnight, that also can be a felony. So it is illegal to do this in Connecticut. And so more information, this website, kidsandcars.org, is a useful website it has information for parents and caregivers. and documents cases of children left behind in cars in extreme temperatures, but it also has information on other dangers for children, such as vehicles set in motion, underage driving, power windows, trunk entrapment, winter dangers, things like that. So it's a good resource. And then there's the Hot Cars Act of 2019. It passed the House last year, but it was not enacted into law. And this it really focuses on requiring new passenger vehicles to have a system to alert drivers to check the back seat after the engine has been shut off. And it's good for children and pets, although it's not enacted into law. Although, like I said, there are some devices that you can purchase when buying a car to detect detection systems that alert drivers. All right, and moving on to drowning. This is a good, important summertime topic, but in 2017, drowning claimed the lives of almost 1,000 children in the US. And these are children less than 20 years old. Toddlers and male adolescents are at the highest risk of drowning death, and rates of drowning death vary by age, gender, and unfortunately race and ethnicity. African-American children have the highest drowning fatality rates, followed by American Indian and Alaska Native, white, Asian American, and Hispanic children. Drowning is also a significant source of morbidity for children. In 2017, 8,700 children, less than 20, visited a hospital emergency department for a drowning event, and about a quarter of these patients were hospitalized. Now, realize that most victims of non-fatal drowning, that means when they drown, they survive, really fully recover with no neurologic deficits. Those neurologic deficits are seen when there is a prolonged submersion time, like when they're under the water for over 6 minutes, or if they need prolonged resuscitation, like with CPR. And so drowning, realize it can occur in multiple settings. It can occur in pools, bathtubs, open water. And unlike on TV and movies, drowning is not loud, it is silent. Kids, they don't thrash, they don't scream, they don't choke. And that's kind of segues into the next slide, which is talking about drowning prevention and water safety. And the most, there's been a lot of data on this, and the most important and evidence-based intervention that families can do is doing a barrier to prevent access to pools or hot tubs. And a barrier means kind of a secure four-sided fencing and gating. And this has been shown to potentially decrease the drownings by 80%. In addition, adult supervision has been shown to be very important. All children should be within arm's reach of an adult at all times in the pool or anywhere, a bathtub. Adults should not be impaired. That means, no alcohol or drugs or anything like that. They should avoid the use of any other distractions like their cell phone. Children should always swim with a partner as second set of eyes. Appropriate use of flotation devices is important, both in bodies of water and on boats. And like I said before, avoidance of alcohol and illicit drugs while swimming or boating, for those adolescents that can impair, their, reflexes and ability to stay afloat. So more on drowning prevention. Like I said, best defense is a constant vigilance. Learning to swim is important, but being able to swim does not make a child drown-proof. Children less than a year of age are most likely to drown in the bathtub. Toddlers, like 1 to 4 years old, are likely to drown in a swimming pool, and older children and adolescents are more likely to drown in a natural body of water. I put this picture of this very cute baby with a nice head of hair. He's in what's called an Otteroo, which is a neck flotation device that was popular, but has not shown any proven benefit and might give parents a false sense of security. Children can slip through the neck hole and drown and potentially strain their neck. If you're using a flotation device, you should be a U.S. Coast Guard approved flotation device, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't stop you from having to have that vigilance and having that being within arm's reach from your child. All right. I see a couple questions. I'm just going to open them up. Oh, Kathy, thank you. Never mind. This is great information. Thank you. I love it. Okay. Thank you. I'm sorry. I thought there was some questions. Let me close that. I don't know if I can. 1 second here. I'm going to close this. I'm going to share my screen one more time. I'm sorry about that. Okay. So firearm injuries, I want to move on to firearm injuries because, I think given the recent awful series of shootings in the US, I think it's an appropriate topic and important topic to discuss. And if we can go back and remember the data presented at the beginning of the presentation regarding the list of leading causes of death in kids, homicide and suicide by firearms account for the third and fourth leading cause of deaths for patients 15 to 18 years old in the US. And in comparison to other high income countries, the US gun homicide rates for 15 to 24-year-olds are 45 times higher and disproportionately affect African American and Latino males. And so every day, about 87 children, teens, and young adults are injured or killed by guns in the United States. So pretty large numbers. All right, so this slide, I want to kind of put gun homicides into perspective, and this is for all ages, not specifically pediatrics. This was a study a few years ago that compared the number of gun homicides per 100,000 people across 15 high-income industrialized nations. And so this is, the nations they looked at very low rates, certainly less than 1 per 100,000. And looking at the United States, gun violence is a horrible problem that probably affects someone or certain degrees of separation. But we're doing the worst across the globe. 3.6 deaths per 100,000 people from gun homicide. And so we're 10 times higher than other developed nations, which personally is atrocious. And not only that, there's a large economic burden of gun homicide. So this is, I took this slide from one of my wonderful colleagues who works actively and is a pioneer for injury prevention in pediatrics, particularly gun violence, and is doing amazing work in New Haven. But looking at the costs of gun homicide in the US, there's a large financial burden. So 5 billion are direct costs annually. And then there's 218 billion that are indirect costs annually. And that's so a total of 223 billion, and this is per year total. And so putting that into perspective, there's gun violence there. If you look at US foreign aid per year, $50 billion. So it's over, gun violence, the cost of that is over 4 times the amount of what we spent on foreign aid in 2018. It's more than twice of what we spend on the damage caused by Hurricane Maria that struck Puerto Rico in 2017. It costs more than what we spend on the management of obesity each year. And it's rising towards the annual cost of smoke-related illnesses in the US. And so this works out to roughly about $700 per person per year. And like I said, this is for just homicide. This doesn't include suicides, which are kind of more difficult to track and quantify. And so I think this is a gross underestimate of the true economic burden of all gun violence. So let's take a second, and before we kind of dive more into it, but we're going to focus on kind of the research aspect. So we talk about the medical problem, the medical impact and the economic impact of gun violence. But, and so you'd think that there'd be a lot of research on gun violence. Unfortunately, that's not the case in the US. So this, I just want to point out a couple things about this graph. You can see, so there's these light blue bars that are the total number of gun violence articles annually. And then there's this orange bar that's the kind of the gun violence articles per million of citations. So this is the percentage of gun violence articles per total amount of articles, if that makes sense. And so you can see there's a rise from the 1970s up to the 2000s. And then in the late 90s, there was something called the Dickey Amendment, which was a rider in the US Omnibus Spending Bill that stipulated that none of the funds for research on injury prevention by the CDC can be used for gun violence. So no gun violence research could happen. And there was heavy lobbying by the NRA for this, and it passed. And you can see that there was, in 1998, there was a drastic decrease in publications by 64%. So that orange line went down very much. And you can see there was an uptick in 2012, 2013, and that's coincidentally the same year as the monstrous Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting. But there is hope. I don't want to get too political, but in December, Congress voted to restore the funding. Lawmakers appropriated $25 million that are split between the CDC and the National Institutes of Health, the NIH, for firearm injury prevention research. So I think a step in the right direction. Looking at firearm injury prevention and kind of how it relates to pediatrics and getting to the main goals of what this discussion is, the AAP, the American Academy of Pediatrics, recommends really the absence of guns from the home. That means that there's no risk of any unintentional gun injuries, suicide, homicide, or anything to children and adolescents. However, It's lawful to have a gun, and that's absolutely understandable. If you do have a firearm in your house, they should be stored separately from the ammunition, and it should be locked, and it should be unloaded. Now, there are various kind of means for safe firearm storage. I just put a few of them on here. They range in size. They range in size. They range in the amount of protection they offer from the firearm, security, accessibility, and price. And this slide really just documents what is available. And these lock boxes and these full-size gun safes and biometric gun safes can be mechanical or electronic. There's a lot of options out there to lock your gun away, but it should be separate from the ammunition and away from children. Child access prevention laws are an effective way to reduce firearm injury in children. These are various states have these, and we'll talk about Connecticut specifically. These mandate the safe storage of firearms to prevent access by minors and impose criminal liability on adults who fail to prevent access. And it may lead to safer storage of firearms and are associated with reduced rates of youth suicides. And despite being unable to purchase firearms directly, many adolescents have access to firearms, and adolescents in states that require universal background checks on all prospective firearm buyers are less likely to carry them. So more stringent background checks means less chance of adolescents getting a gun in their hands. All right, so here's the map of the US with the gun law scorecard grade. So, you can see, throughout the United States, different states have different gun law grades. Connecticut, and here's the website. This is from the Giffords Law Center, who does a lot of research on this. But Connecticut received an A-. Their gun law strength is 3 out of 50, so good. And their gun death rank, is 45 out of 50, so good. So on average, looking at every state, Connecticut the average is 11.9 gun death rate per 100,000 people. Connecticut is 5.3, so much lower. All right, and then in the sense of time, I have a few slides here on kind of injury prevention. I call them quick hits, things that are things that are important to consider at home. So first we'll just hit on poisonings. And there was something called the Poisoning Prevention Packaging Act of 1970 that was signed by Richard Nixon, that required the use of child-resistant packaging for prescription drugs, over-the-counter medicines, household chemicals, and other hazardous materials that could be considered dangerous for children. In the decade that followed this legislation, it was estimated that nearly 200,000 pediatric unintentional ingestions were prevented. So that's good, but you can do other things. Keep all medicines and chemicals and things in the house locked up and away, out of the reach of your children. Also, if you don't keep it, if you don't keep it, if you don't need it. So if you're done with the medicine, dispose of it, and know the number. What number do you ask? This number, the Poison Control Center number. And this number, it's in the state of Connecticut, but this number is universal for the United States. So wherever you are, it's the same number. You call this number, and you'll be directed to a Poison Control Center to discuss the case. And this is a good number to have if you have kids or not. This is useful also if a family member, an older person, ingests or accidentally takes something. And they provide good information about whether it's serious or whether you need to go to the hospital or seek care. In addition, back to sleep. This was introduced back in 1994. This is to attempt to reduce sudden infant death. And it recommends that all children should be laid down alone in their crib, without on their back, without anything in their crib, such as pillows, blankets, etc. And trying to keep a drug-free home. And this kind of helps save infant lives. All right, fall prevention. How to make your home safer for those toddlers that are very uncoordinated and fall a lot. There, guards on the windows that are above ground level are useful. Stair gates are super important, and guardrails as well on beds and cribs. Have them at a good height so that your children can't climb over them. And keep sports safe. all children should wear protective gear during sports and recreation, wrist, knee, and elbow pads, riding a bike, scooters, skateboards, things like that. And then helmets, I'll talk about more in the next slide, but helmets are incredibly important, not just for, bike riding and things like that, but for sports, hockey, football, lacrosse, things like that, will help prevent significant head injuries. And supervision is key for your children when they're participating in any sort of recreational event. I want to just touch a little bit about bicycle helmet fitting, because helmets are incredibly important and they reduce the risk of head injuries by about 45% in children. And so how to determine if your helmet's the correct size? First, you want to try it on, make sure it fits snug. And while the helmet is sitting flat on the head, you want to make sure it does not move side to side. So you can have your child kind of wiggle his or her head around and see it, make sure it doesn't move side to side. All helmets come with some sort of sizing pads that you can insert to make it a more secure fit. And the newer helmets come with also with this universal fit ring that you can twist to make it fit a little more snug. When you have the helmet on, it should sit low on the forehead with only about 1 to 2 finger widths above the eyebrow. And with the helmet on properly, your child should look up, and your child should be able to see the bottom rim of the helmet from if it's on appropriately. As far as the mouth, with the helmet on, ask your child to open his or her mouth as wide as possible, and the helmet should feel like it's hugging the head. If not, then the straps need to be tightened. And you should not be able to fit more than 1 finger in between the chin and the strap once it's tightened. Ears, the helmet strap which should be snug but comfortable, should form a Y shape under each of your child's ears. So like the diagram shows, it should form a Y. All right, and finally, about burn prevention. I can't say enough about alarms, both carbon monoxide and smoke alarms. They should be installed and maintained in your home, and they should be tested at least once a month. Smoke alarms specifically should be installed on every floor and near all rooms that family members sleep in. Have an escape plan. Make sure everyone in your family knows at least 2 ways out of every room, and identify a central meeting place outside. Cook with care. This is a very common cause of fires in the house. So you want to use safe cooking practices, such as never leaving food unattended on the stove. You want to, if your child is, helping you out cooking, supervise or restrict your child's use of the stove, ovens, and especially microwaves, but you want to supervise them closely. And then finally, you want to check your water heater temperature. You want to set your heater's thermostat to no more than 120 degrees or lower. You want to prevent those unintentional scalding burns from too hot of water in the bathtub or shower. And I want to thank all of you for your attention. And what I've included here on the final slide here is some resources. The topic of pediatric injury and prevention and safety is a big topic, broader, I think, than this just kind of brief 1-hour talk. But these are useful resources that can help parents and caregivers learn more about injury prevention and pediatric safety. And I hope you can take home some of the stuff we learned today and what we discussed, but also, these websites have more information on, sports safety and fall prevention, childproofing your home, things like that. And then I'll point out one specifically, I myself get overwhelmed with kind of the amount of recalls of certain consumer products and kid stuff. But the US CPSC has information on product recalls, regulations, laws, and standards. So the Consumer Product Safety Commission is a good resource for that. And I'm going to stop there, and I'll open it up to any questions that anyone has. All right, and let me stop sharing my screen. Okay. All right, so I thank all of you for your time and attention, and I hope this was useful. And I don't see any questions coming up in the Q&A. This will be posted, this presentation will be posted online, and so you can utilize that should you want to get the resources or the links that were provided, or get any of the information that was provided. All right, thank you so much.